Hello and welcome back to another episode of Safety for Cruisers. Today we're going to be covering fires, fire safety, and what you should have to address those hazards on board. First, we're going to start out talking about what fire is. Second, we'll go over the different classes of fire. And third, we'll go into how to fight them and some of the best strategies to keep your boat safe while you are out on the water. So to start off with, we have our little screen up there. We got the fire triangle, now called the fire tetrahedron because we got to be all fancy. Essentially what you're looking at though is there's three things a fire needs to remain lit and to grow. You need heat, fuel, and oxygen, and all three of those together form the chemical chain reaction. So for all intents and purposes, you really just need those three ingredients. That's what we're going to spend most of our time on, but that's kind of the latest and greatest, so that's what you have. So as far as the different classes of fires, we'll basically go through them alphabetically. So class A is for ash. So A is any kind of carbon-based fire. If all the nice wood on the interior of the boat was burning, that would be a class A fire. B is for barrel, so liquids. So if our fuel tank or any part of our fuel system caught on fire, that would be a class B fire. And a class C fire, C is for current, Charlie, electricity. So if all of the nice circuitry that we had up there wasn't protected and we had a short and it lit a wire on fire, that would be a class C fire. Class D is for dynamite, for metals. So D is basically a special metals fire. Not very common, but they do occur. Like magnesium is one example, super dangerous because it produces its own oxygen. It's a lot harder to put out. But luckily don't have to do all that too much on boats. And then the last one is going to be a K for kitchen, a grease fire. So those are your different classes of fire, and we'll talk about now how the different extinguishers that there are out there fight those fires. So the most common extinguisher that you're going to have on a boat is going to be a dry chem extinguisher. That's going to be this guy here. And dry chem is it's usually classified as a ABC, but you can kind of fight all the different kinds of fires with it. That's why it's the preferred method. And the reason for that is that it fights fire in pretty much on all the different fronts. So one of the things it does is a dry powder. So when you spray it onto the flames, it creates a little bit of a barrier between the fuel and the oxygen, and it starves the fire of oxygen. Another thing it does is it can saturate the fuel, and it can potentially decrease its how much vapor it's putting off, so it can starve it of fuel a little bit that way. And it also does have, the powder does have some heat absorbent qualities as well. So it kind of addresses all three, and that's why it works so well. Another great thing is that you can use it on all different kinds of fires. So if it's just a regular class A fire, no problem. You can spray it on there. B, if it's a liquid, it's going to be okay for that. It's not going to be as effective as some other things like, say, firefighting foam, but as far as equipment that cruisers have on board, it's going to work for that as well. Class C fire, there are some special extinguishers. This is an old halon. It's been phased out because halon's damaging to the environment. We happen to have an old one on board, so I pulled it out. It's been phased out by other gases like CO2. Gas extinguishers are great for electrical fires, but the thing with an electrical fire is you want to turn it from a class C fire to a class whatever else is going to be fire. More likely than others, we'll just call it an A. It doesn't matter. But what that means is you want to de-energize the circuits. So we're gonna get into that a little bit later. If you have a class D fire on board, so you had some kind of crazy engine that had a magnesium block, that's when you're going to want a specific chemical extinguisher for that type of metal. They do make dry powder extinguishers that are designed for certain metals and certain applications. So if you happen to have a boat that has some specialized equipment on it that you need to get a dry powder extinguisher for, definitely recommend doing that because, like I said, Class D is super dangerous. A lot of them produce their own oxygen and they're incredibly hard to put out, so you want to avoid that. One of the common things you're going to have in a boat is a galley fire. So not necessarily going to be a Class K, a grease fire, but if you did end up with a Class K fire, the gas extinguishers aren't going to work as well. The dry powder is going to work pretty well. And then another great thing you can have on board is a fire blanket. That's basically just a fireproof material that if you had a pan, you were frying bacon and it lit up, you just toss it on there, you turn the gas off, and you just sit there and you wait until it's cold to the touch. So fire blankets are super good to have in galleys. You can kind of distribute them throughout the boat. They're pretty cheap. They don't expire. They do have expiration dates, but they're going to be pretty durable items, so they're great safety items to purchase. Another important aspect of fire safety is making sure that your flammable gases and liquids stay where they are supposed to be. We touched on this a little bit previously in our walkthrough, but the solenoid for your propane, if you do have a propane system on board, a lot of boats do, the solenoid system is a super important thing because what that does is the solenoid will shut the gas off at the cylinder itself. Instead of having a tube full of gas running down to a valve that's in your galley, the gas is actually going to be stopped inside the lazarette or wherever you have that tank stored, and that means that the entire inside of the boat is, in theory, flammable gas free. So it's super important to have a solenoid if you have gas plumbed internally, even if you don't, even if it's plumbed outside to a barbecue. If you have any kind of a significant hose run where it's not just a barbecue attached immediately to a tank that you can just shut off, especially if you have the tanks stowed inside lazarettes where you're going to be prone to not shutting them off because you're lazy and you're like, oh, I'm going to use the barbecue this evening, we'll just leave it on. Super important to have a solenoid and have that switch in a good place where it's visible, you can see the light, you know if it's on or off, and that it's accessible so that you can very easily turn it on and turn it off and keep that gas outside. A good habit is if you have, say you have a propane locker and you have a little bit of space, keep your other flammable liquids in there. So you want to kind of keep all of your nasties in one little area. You don't keep your trash just in all the different compartments on the boat. You kind of keep it in a little trash can, then you put it in a bag, and then you put it wherever you put it. Same kind of thing for flammable liquids and gases. If you have stuff that is flammable or combustible, then you want to keep all of those together, and you want that together location to be in a well-ventilated compartment. So the point of that is that it's going to be naturally ventilated, could potentially be forced if it's on a bigger boat, but you want to have it well ventilated so that if there is, say, a leaky container or even just the natural off-gassing of, say, paint, you want to have those fumes escape into the atmosphere, get out of that compartment so that they don't accumulate, and then potentially one of the things that can happen is just in a normal day, if you have fumes accumulating in a compartment, if there is either a ignition source, say a spark or a short, then they can ignite that way, or they can even spontaneously ignite if the temperature reaches high enough. So super important to keep all of your flammable liquids and gases in a well ventilated compartment, and ideally together so you don't have to worry about ventilating multiple spaces. Another thing to consider is circuit protection. Electrical fires burn down boats on a pretty regular basis, and they're super nasty because you have two problems. You have electricity flowing through and you have a fire now. So circuit protection prevents electrical fires in most cases if it's well installed. And what it does is whether it's a fuse or a breaker, it's going to be paired with a wire. So depending on the length and the diameter of the wire, you're going to get a fuse or a breaker for that. And what that breaker is going to do is it's going to trip, or the fuse is going to blow before that wire gets hot enough that its insulation is going to combust and you're going to end up with a fire. So really important to get circuit protection on all of your wire runs. Big gauge high voltage is even more critical, so you want to really pay attention to those. And then the other thing is you want to make sure that you have a master shutoff for your electrical. So for us, it's right over next to our companionway. It's easily accessible. It's next to our EPIRB, and all the crew knows, all they have to do is turn that to off. So what that does is that de-energizes all of our circuits. That disconnects everything. So if you have a Class C fire, you're going to take the charge out of that Class C and turn it into a Class A. Couple of exceptions that are notable is when you have switches like that, some boats, depending on the design, will have systems that are wired separately. For instance, my bilge pumps go straight to the battery. A lot of other boats do. So it's important to know your boat, know what shutting off different breakers and different switches will do. So we covered our different classes of fire. We covered pretty much went over, that extinguisher is going to be good for most of them. Now we'll go into some strategies. So first, we'll cover the pass method. So when you're using an extinguisher, you're going to use the pass method. That's how you can remember how the proper way to use a fire extinguisher, and that's going to be pull, aim, squeeze, sweep. So you got your extinguisher here, and you're going to pull the pin. A lot of them have these safety detents, so that'll snap right off. You'll pull the pin out, you'll aim at the base of the fire. You'll be a couple feet back, depending on the room. A lot of times there's space constraints on boats, but you want to aim at the base of the fire. You want to be a little distant from it, and then it's going to be squeeze. So you'll depress the trigger and sweep back and forth. Pull, aim, squeeze, sweep. That's the acronym that you can help remember to fight fires. So that's how you use a fire extinguisher. Some things that you can do to maximize your chances of having an effective fire fighting operation on board is to plan out your vessel for fires. So you want to have a fire extinguisher in every cabin, and ideally you want to have a bit of a bigger one in high risk areas. So we have a big dry powder extinguisher over by where our fuel tank is, and we've doubled up. We have multiple fire extinguishers over in the galley area. So if you say can't access one extinguisher because it's on the other side of the fire, you want to really quickly be able to go in and grab another one and be able to access it that way. That goes into another critical component of all boat safety, not just fire, and that is knowing your boat and knowing where everything is. That's not just for the cruisers, but for, say if you have crew come on board, or if you have guests, you want to make sure that everybody on board is aware of where the extinguishers are and how to use them. Very simple. You just do a quick walkthrough, point out where they are, what kind they are, and you go over the pass method with them. Very quick, but it can make a very big difference in terms of the survivability of a fire. Boat fires are incredibly dangerous because just about everything on a boat burns. And it burns very well, and it burns very quickly. So you can go from a small grease fire, if it catches the curtains that are up top, and then it spreads to your headliner, then it spreads to the wood, and then it spreads to the equipment. You can have a fully engulfed boat in just a couple of minutes. If you have a gas-powered boat, it's extremely important to ventilate your machinery spaces and your fuel spaces for at least 5 air exchanges. So however long your blower takes to get those air exchanges in, yeah, 1's okay, 2's better. Give it plenty of time. Don't rush yourself. Ventilate the space out, get all your air exchanges in so that you don't have an explosion when you go to kick your motors on. It happens on a pretty regular basis, and it's super dangerous. So gasoline powered vessels, beware that you've got different considerations to take in. Diesel is much less volatile. It means it doesn't off gas as much. It's not nearly as dangerous, but obviously it burns quite well, so we don't want to mess with diesel either. That kind of moves into the fuel system. Some things you can do to maximize the safety of your fuel system is, one, you want to be routinely checking it for leaks. You shouldn't have a hose that it drips a little bit of diesel into the bilge every so often. If you have a leak, if you find anything, even a hose clamp that looks kind of rusty, just replace it. You want to minimize the chances of diesel or whatever fuel you're running getting into any spaces that they don't belong. So that's one thing, inspecting your system. You want to have a fuel shutoff valve right at the tank. So every tank, right as the fuel line comes off, it should have a nice Y valve, so that if something were to happen, you have a fire in the engine space, you go back, you shut that fuel off, and it deprives the fire of fuel, and now the fire is going to go out. might not go out immediately. The lines are going to have to burn up and everything else, but you aren't necessarily going to have an infinite amount of diesel that you have coming out of your tank supplying this fire. So fuel shutoff valves and making sure your fuel system is well maintained and nicely organized as well. You don't want to just have a massive cables and wires and fuel lines all mixed together. If possible, you want to run your fuel lines separately. You want to keep them away from high current wires. So if you're running a windlass wire up to the bow and you got a fuel tank in the bow, maybe don't put those giant double aught wires next to your fuel line. Kind of separate them a little bit. So that's one thing. Another thing you can do is to have access ports in your high-risk areas. So another great way to to put out a fire is to deprive it of oxygen. That can be a little tricky on boats because we don't have hermetically sealed compartments that we can close up. But say you have an insulated engine compartment, you have a fire in there. You don't want to pull that panel wide open and check it out to see what's going on. If you have a little access port and you can see flames and you have smoke coming out of there, you would want to pull that access port out, stick the nose of the extinguisher in there, and discharge that extinguisher in there. You want to leave that closed until everything is cooled to the touch and you're 100% confident that the fire is out. The reason for that is that if you, say, spray the extinguisher in there, it looks pretty much out, and you open it up, if there was still a spark or there was still some material that was able to ignite, you've now supplied that with oxygen that it previously didn't have because it burned everything, and now you've got a full flaming inferno, probably right in your face. So if you have engine compartment access ports for fire extinguishers, most of the new boats come with them. You want to utilize those to not only view the space without having to open it, but it's also designed as a port for fire extinguishers to be discharged through. Last thing we're going to cover is the actual kind of maintenance and upkeep of extinguishers. Like everything else, they're going to have expiration dates, and they're going to need to be serviced. You can find those on the tags when you buy the packages. That you can see it on the package usually, and you want to make sure that you're keeping those current. A lot of people, what they do and what I do is I don't get rid of my old extinguishers. When the old ones go out of service, I'll buy a new stock and I'll put those throughout the boat, but I'll keep the old ones, and now I could have potentially doubled the amount of extinguishers I have on board. Obviously, we're not counting on those old ones as being our front line of defense against the fire, but double the amount of extinguishers is definitely better than half of that. And if you have all of these are going to have gauges on them. If the needle's in the green, there's a decent chance it's going to work. Again, we don't want to count on that, and I'm not advocating you to ignore the expiration dates and not get them serviced, but if you don't have to toss it out and you got space to stow it somewhere, why not put one in your dinghy? Why not put two under the galley sink and put two over near the fuel compartment, and that way you can increase your chances of fighting fires successfully. One last thing to go over is how do we know that there is a fire? So what I'm talking about is smoke detectors and CO detectors. So super important to have those around the boat, to have them tested, and to have them functional. Whether they're hardwired with a line that goes to your 12-volt system, or they're battery powered, you want to make sure that they are in the proper places. So what that means is that they're targeting the gas that they're sensing. So smoke detectors, best up top. Smoke rises. If you put a smoke detector on the floor, you're going to be dead before the smoke detector goes off, because the last place that smoke is going to go to is the floor. So you want to get smoke detectors up high. If you have CO detectors, it's good to kind of disperse them. CO is very similar to the weight of air, so it's not going to just drop straight to the floor like some heavier gases will, and it's not like helium where it's just going to go up straight to the atmosphere. It kind of disperses out, and CO is super dangerous because it's colorless, odorless, tasteless. It's just this kind of thing where you might have a little bit of a headache and then you're dead. So you want to have CO detectors on board, and they do sell combo smoke and CO, so those are good. but you want to make sure that you're distributing them around. So maybe put one down low next to your engine, put one up high above the kitchen, put them in the different cabins. The more you have of those, the more likely you are to be able to detect when you have a dangerous gas, whether that's smoke or CO. So stay tuned for our next video next week.